permaculture, we believe that being sustainable is not sustainable anymore. One has to be regenerative. Sustainability is actually a scarcity mindset. There's not enough. Okay, but regenerative design is an abundance mindset. So there can be ample for everyone, and that's how you create a system that it gives them back much more. And that's what permaculture is about, and it can be permanent only with regenerative design.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tiny Farm Friends podcast. Often we find ourselves at the crossroads of what we should do and what we must do. We are asking ourselves those existential questions. And during these times, if you are paying attention, life presents you with small signs or experiences that gently nudge you in the right direction. And meeting Sourabh was one such experience. He has certainly shaped our life paths. We believe that in today's world, just appreciating nature's beauty is not enough. We must protect it, preserve it, and even regenerate it. And Sourabh's artistic activism is a dynamic combination of his practice as an ecological builder and a permaculture designer. He has worked extensively in rural areas of Madhya Pradesh with the indigenous people, and he has worked for TIEEDI, a permaculture forest garden in Darjeeling, where he has helped them design natural buildings using bamboo, his favorite building material, if I can say. We always relish our conversations with Sourabh because he's a great storyteller, a sensitive and compelling thinker about meaningful things. Even if you're not an architect, this conversation is for everyone to ponder upon. So let me first tell you about the story how we actually ended up meeting you. So it was in 2019 summer, I guess, and the plan was that Ansh and my mom, we were planning a family trip and we were supposed to go to Nepal actually. But what happened was, unfortunately, we booked a ticket with Jet Airways that time and it shut down last minute. So we changed our plans to come to Darjeeling in Sikkim. And while trying to plan for the trip, we were looking for some Airbnbs and homestays. And we came across this TIEEDI permaculture forest garden. And before that, permaculture for me as an architecture student, the only memory I had about permaculture was some Australian professor coming to our college and trying to explain us how human pee could be used efficiently to grow plants. And that was the only knowledge I had about permaculture. It was fascinating, but I didn't dig deeper. So we were so glad that we came to TIEEDI, and that time, I think you were managing the farm and Utso, the founder, and his wife were, I think, trekking somewhere and they were away. And you were a great host, and you were so kind that you actually gave us an upgrade to the earth dwelling, which is just right in the middle of the forest, next to the river. And that is where I actually first had my leech attack as well. So that was the first time I experienced something like that. And it was very serene and surreal. And next day you took us for a permaculture walk while you explained us the principles of permaculture. It was all very enlightening, and you showed us the air dwelling, I think that time you were working on with local artisans. So honestly, like, that was a life-changing tour, like where Ansh and me are right now trying to build a cob house by ourselves. So I think that was one of the, key moments that has led us to where we are in our life right now. So thank you for that life-changing tour. And now,
I mean, for me, it was really out of nowhere that how we met, and to know that you both are architects, and to that was a connecting point for us. Someone who is also an architect is living into the forest, and you guys were visiting. So it was very random the way we met at first, and then the tour happened where we were able to like show you around what's happening in TIEEDI. So I mean, like I was living there at least like by that time I was living there for 1 year. So I was able to know some of the things which were happening, and used to give this tour. So the idea of giving the tour of the farm was like to dissipate it to more people, so that a lot more people know about what's happening with in permaculture. So it's not just by living there or volunteering that people get to know about these ideas, but even just by staying it. And that's a huge part as a traveler when you're living and you like traveling consciously, and you know about certain aspects of what you can take care of while you're and become a little more sensitive about how you're living in hills and what impact you can have. And there's so many people who just transit. So how to capitalize on it in a way that people take that idea ahead and dissipate it, or sow some seeds in people that they can sort of have plans of these ideas of permaculture. So that's the main idea why we give tours to a lot of guests who just drop by and host them.
So like, can you walk us through the background story, like how you ended up in TIEEDI, and maybe explain what is TIEEDI, just to give in context to people who are like listening for the first time about TIEEDI as a permaculture forest garden.
Okay, so I mean, like the way I ended up in TIEEDI was a very random situation which happened. I was doing this bamboo course because while I was in different parts of Madhya Pradesh, I came to understand that lateral building is something I want to do. And that's why I started learning about bamboo, and I enrolled into a course under Neelam Manjunath from Bangalore called Manasram Architects. So then it was a year-long course. I had one workshop just done, like 1 week of using bamboo and some months of learning about it. And the very next day my workshop is finished, I get a call from my one of my friends and mentor, Meenakshi ji, and she's also a really renowned architect, and we happened to bump into each other into all of these rural explorations and all, and somehow we met, and she just ended up telling me about this couple who was working in Darjeeling and who wanted someone to help them with bamboo design. And she told me that you can go there and help them and just have a call with them. And we had a call with Utsav, Ashna, and then they were like, okay, when you can come over. And that's how in 7 days time from Bangalore, I just came to Bhopal, packed my bags and went to Darjeeling I was thinking like I will be there for a week or two just to help them with design. I ended up living there for 2.5 years, helping them design those buildings and understanding that, okay, this is the kind of life I want to do, I want to live, and these are the kind of buildings that I want. So it was very random how we started working there and started exploring the bamboo as a material for building design and everything, and doing a lot of hands-on. TIEEDI, coming back to the question, the TIEEDI is a permaculture forest garden, and they're practicing right at the center of where the problems are. So it's a farm which is not isolated. Like a lot of people think like permaculture hai ya हम लोग को अगर फॉरेस्ट में रहना है या हम लोगों को ऐसा कुछ करना है, like living organically and all, so you have to move out and live out from the society in a seclusion. But that's where TIEEDI is very interesting. It is right into the center of problem. There's a lot of villages nearby. Darjeeling is the main road, the main highway just crosses by. And so the problem that there is it is entirely made on a place which used to be a dumping place. A lot of waste used to be dumped there, and they have been sort of driving the force with volunteers, with community involved to clean up that space and create a native forest out there and revive it with permaculture principles. So they're not living in seclusion; they are living with the community, driving the community with different ideas and different inputs, and helping it sort of revive the land and river that is there, the 8 Mile Khola. So that is what TIEEDI is about. And for me, it has been a really interesting learning curve. The time I've spent there, the time we've lived with the Nepali community out there and worked with the local techniques. So that way, yes, and TIEEDI. um, and so the word TIEEDI means take it easy, easy does it. So, and it's like really important part of what we as a community are there. And it helps us to sort of zone down and come back, because at times the type of work we're doing is a lot challenging, a lot mind numbing when you work with waste, when you try to go zero waste and you see the kind of waste that are being generated and how the situation is so grave. So at that time, you just sit back a little, you take it easy and easy does it. So yeah,
sometimes it gets really overwhelming and you need to break up things in like smaller steps and maybe take one step at a time and one day at a time.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. So can you like explain permaculture in your own words, like in a short way, to people who might be listening that term for the first time, what it is?
Yeah, definitely. So permaculture, if you break it into two parts, it can be permanent culture or permanent agriculture. How do you make a culture permanent? So it's a design methodology, design science, which tries to understand the cycles in nature and replicate it in your lifestyle. And it can be anything. It is not just about growing food. It's not just about natural building. It's about different processes, how you can align it. It can be about how you take care of your waste. As you observe in nature, nothing goes waste. So everything is in a cyclic format. So you apply that observation from nature, you observe it, and then you try to see how things can be simplified, how things can be done in a way that it has a natural order. And simply you can apply those solutions of observation for creating a water solutions like watershed management or reviving a forest, reviving a soil, how it happens. And there are all solutions in nature. So even your buildings, how it happens. How do you learn from birds? How do you learn from fungus? How do you learn from trees? So all of those aspects, there is a simple science and permaculture gives you tools for assessment, tools for seeing these things, and then it's an open platform. So we always say this, that the native people, indigenous people, are the first permaculturist because they have all their process already aligned with nature. The term was coined in Australia by Bill Mollison and a group of other permaculturists, but Bill Mollison is the main guy behind it. And they introduced it and dissipated the word and the set of design principles that are now practiced. But indigenous people, they have been doing the same things without calling it permaculture for hundreds and thousands of years.
True. So you are coming from an architectural background, right? And so now how has your perspective changed about architecture since, if you compare it to your perspective about the profession when you were a student?
A very interesting question. So as a student also, I used to be a lot of times, I always tell this, I've been very fortunate to get some teachers who always had ways of teaching from nature, not entirely, but through stories and through expressions of observation from nature. So that way, I mean, I was the things that we are taught in architecture is more of concrete and more of how to design the load and all of those systems. We're not taught about natural materials at all. So there was no exposure at all about what natural material is and how it can be used in building, because the course does not talk about it at all. It's not a pakka building. It's not a permanent settlement thing. It's not a thing for people to what is it called? I mean, what people aspire for. So that it's not taught. So there was no idea about there's something like natural building or permaculture. So with permaculture lens, you try to assess a lot of different things which are taught in bits and pieces in architecture. So we always had a course, a subject called climatology, which does tell us about like using contextual changes and using contextual design parameters, like your how to design fenestrations, how to use azimuth angles, how to use sun angles, all of that to create your shading, all of that. But it does not go into the depth of how to do it and how you can do it in a local context that even energy consumed for it is less. So permaculture similarly, like simply talk about like local solutions. So I find a very big divide that why is it not told to architects? I mean, you can do this with so many materials, and especially in India, we have so huge palette of materials that we that a lot of people are still living in. Like still a lot of our population lives in natural buildings. They don't call it that, but yeah. The problem is they're not aspiring to be in that, because they've like shown a picture like, okay, through different medias that this is the definition of development we always keep talking about, that is crooked. Only when you're moving to the cities or living in like cement buildings and all. So that way they're not aspiring to be living in those natural buildings which they have ancestral knowledge about. And with introduction to permaculture, I started understanding like, okay, there are localized solutions with natural building, and there's a different way of looking into the buildings that are possible. And I would just like to add a little more about the story. So, and this is not after permaculture. So while after my college, what happened is I didn't want to join a commercial farm. So I took a gap year entirely, and I was not working. I was just volunteering at different places. I was into some activism from before itself. I used to write plays. We used to do Nukkad Natak for different things. And I'm coming from Bhopal. So everyone, I mean, a lot of people might be knowing about Bhopal gas tragedy. So that was kind of a shocker, not a shocker. I mean, that was something which pushed me to activism in a way. A lot of friends was aligned in that way.
This was during your college days or your school days, you're saying?
From college days. And in school days, there was a different kind of activism. Like I used to write plays during that time. Also, I wrote a play where all of my friends took part into it, and it was about Narmada Bachao Andolan. So the dam that got created out there, and which lead to a lot of displacement of tribals. So I mean, there was some insight, some idea about like how people's lives are dependent on land, and how displacement has an effect on it. And how the Bhopal gas tragedy also has affected a lot of people and the land they live in and the water they consume, and sort of that kind of inclination. So while I was in college, we did, I was part of this group called CAN, Citizens Action Network, and we made a sculpture out of cardboard and some bamboo and some pieces, and we took out a procession into the city, talking about कि जहर आपको पाल रहा है and जहर आपके पानी में है, like because the Bhopal gas tragedy is still a big problem. It has not been cleared and all, so the water is seeping down into the aquifer, and once it gets there, like our groundwater is completely gone. I mean, it will be a problem. You can't consume it anymore. So those kind of issues. So while I was doing that, I mean, some amount of activism like is in the back of mind. So while I was doing this gap year, I applied for a fellowship by UNICEF. I got through it, and I was living into Jhabua, which is a tribal community in Madhya Pradesh, and I was living there for 1 month, and the idea was to live their life the way they live it. So we were growing food, we were eating big rotis made out of white makkah, and the rotis used to be such that rotis were the thali, so itself. So you would eat from it. So trying to learn those things.
So this is in Madhya Pradesh only, the area you are talking about, Jhabua.
Yes. Jhabua, it's a matriarchal society. It's one of the place in India with highest male-female ratio, and very interesting setup they have. And I was living there with them for a month, and so I had these idea preconceived in my head about rural lifestyle. But while I was living there for a month, I was able to live it and experience it. So it even got more reinforced. So then I started going around with these people who work for land rights and all. So I was called Ekta Parishad. It's a group of people who have a lot of people who are connected in like 10, 11 different states in India, who work on grassroots levels with tribals. So I started going to different villages in Madhya Pradesh and on different corners, like up north, towards east, center, everywhere. And I started observing these natural buildings that they have. So because as an architect, you can't close your eyes, whatever you're doing. So I always had that eye open for the villages, how they've done their planning, how they've been making their building. And that's when I realized, okay, I mean, whatever activism I have to do, I have to do it through architecture and not anything else. Because that's my forte. That's something which I've learned about, and which has a lot to give, basically. So, and that's when I started learning about bamboo. And after this is what TIEEDI happened to me. So, a lot of background story.
Very interesting.
I forgot how we started.
Yeah. So, like, how did you not succumb to? What was a motivating force, like, so that you did not take up a mainstream architecture job and earning a salary? So, like, did you face those kind of pressures and like making a choice between the two lives, or maybe like practicing conventional architecture versus devoting your service to, say, working in rural areas and staying with your ethics?
It's a very interesting question, and I'll go back a little to the journeys which I was having with Ekta Parishad. So when I was doing that, I got introduced to a lot of Gandhian ideology. So, and we were working with Rajagopal PV, which is like one of the really prominent Gandhian philosopher and practitioner and activist in that way. And when we look at Gandhi, we just think that him as like a person who has been a precursor for the independence. But Gandhi was a designer. He was an urbanist. He had an idea of decades ahead. He had the idea of Gram Swaraj. Okay. And he had the idea of how enabling local communities can strengthen the whole system. So, I won't go too far from the question that you've asked. So the idea is these thoughts which were getting preconceived about local economies, local communities, told me that, whatever I do as a commercial architect practicing in cities, I will be consuming a lot of resources. I would be consuming a lot, and I will be bringing in resources from a lot more far off places and using it there. And why not work with local materials? Why will not with locally available resources, which is a little difficult to do in cities, which can be probably a later on task, which I do in future when I learn more. But to start off working with locally available materials, the village or the rural areas or people who are working in the hills suited the best to solve that equation of not doing something which is not localized. So that was the idea, and that's why going into a commercial setup never came to the mind, because at a very early stage, in like just 1 year out of my college, I was able to expose myself to these possibilities that are there. And the idea of Gram Swaraj was in my head, really concrete even now is, and I find it as a very far-fetched ideology that has been observed. And Gandhi, interestingly, had a very close friend who was an architect when he was living in Africa, and he is a person who has worked with leather. He has made things out of leather. He has worked with different media, and he was a person of design. He used and he also introduced a competition of the first design competition in India, or like Free India, which happened, and that was for the charkha. The double charkha that is famous, and the charkha he uses was designed by him. So he was a product designer also. So that way, it's very interesting. I mean, now there is a lot of ideological shift, like where Gandhi is attached to a lot of, wrong things. We should not go there actually. But he, as a designer,
I totally resonate with what you are saying, and even with his philosophy of making villages self-sustainable, and maybe that could actually solve the whole problem. So the push and pull effect of the city that we talk, the rise of urbanism. So like if we could maybe make these villages only self-sustainable in a way, like that could actually solve the problem. And he thought that at that time, and we are now talking about smart cities and stuff like that, but maybe we should maybe focus on making the villages only self-sustainable in a way, so that people do not like go towards the city in itself and maybe overpopulated, and then cause all the problem that our cities are facing right now. So now talking about sustainability, that it came up, it has become a buzzword. So what are your thoughts on sustainability? How do you define sustainability?
So for me, I mean, sustainability, yes, as you very rightly said, like it is a buzzword, and it has been sort of misused a lot, especially in architecture. Like students just sell it by saying like this is a sustainable design, and even architects a lot of times. But I think it is in permaculture we believe that being sustainable is not sustainable anymore. One has to be regenerative. One has to. So sustainable is like what you're taking, how much you consume, you are giving back to the system. Okay, but being regenerative is you give back even more. So the things have gone so wrong, and we have seen the red code being released by the IPCC a few days back, and the situation is like really bad. So the time, if we become just sustainable, it's not going to help us. So we have to be giving more to the system. What sustainability is actually scarcity mindset. There's not enough. Okay, but regenerative design is an abundance mindset. So there can be ample for everyone, and that's how you create a system that it gives back much more.
True.
And that's what permaculture is about, and it can be permanent only with regenerative design. So here in permaculture we talk about regenerative design solutions, where systems are self-running and they give you back a yield. So yeah.
And they could maybe replicate themselves also in a way, like being
Yes, yes.
firstly sustainable and then replicating those systems.
Yeah, and
In
independent,
regenerative.
basically, least energy intensive materials which work on natural forces itself. And that way it becomes least human involvement into it without machines being involved, but nature being involved in the process.
Like nature is, I would say, like much more intelligent than we are. And when we like allow it
Exactly.
to work in its full capacity and maybe
Yeah,
create
yeah.
systems that actually
Mm-hmm.
allow nature to do its own magic,
Yeah,
that is how
yeah,
maybe we can get more regenerative and create more abundance and maybe share that
yeah,
abundance with people. That's are
definitely.
like, if I understand correctly, some of the principles of permaculture is a fair share and giving back
Yeah,
the
yeah.
abundance that you create. So
Yes.
you've been living close to nature a lot. So how do you think that has actually influenced your creativity?
Um, so in a lot of ways, like, I mean, you look at a lot of design inputs and outcomes. How can it go in sync with what is happening around it? So, and how what is available easily, how it can be used in the design. So this completely changes your palette of material. It completely changes how you look at a finish. So probably in a city, a person feels like a finish of a different kind as aesthetic. But when you're living close to nature, you start blurring that boundary of what is finish and what is, and it becomes more of earthy, more of natural, more of the color palette starts transforming. You don't want to sort of stand out very much. You want to sort of camouflage a little. So that way, if you see air dwelling as of now, it's something which sets very subtly into the forest and does not stand out. So it has definitely changed how I would want my building. As architects, we try to be very sort of, at times, I don't know, I can't generalize it. A lot of architects have different opinion also,
Yeah,
but at times, yeah, but at times we try to stand out a lot from the place and with the design. But when we're designing in nature, you want to keep in consideration the colors that you are using, and it should be something which is not obstructive for the ecosystems that are around. So I'll just share one incident. Like we were in Bandhavgarh. We were just staying in one of the lodges because we don't have any comm as of now made there. So there's a bird called hoopoe. It has a beak like this. So this hoopoe will come and sit near the window and see its own reflection and see as a sort of a, I mean, another bird out there and would try to hit it. So it will keep on banging its head onto the glass, which is, I mean, so wrong. So you can't use certain materials when you are working close to nature, and you can't. You should be very sensitive to what are the ecosystems, what kind of heat island effect you are trying to transmit into that area, because subtle change in temperature will not let certain mushrooms to grow, certain bees to be, or that's why in TIEEDI, you must have observed, like we don't have any lights when you go down that trek, and that's why you see a lot of fireflies out there. And if there's too much of light pollution happening out there, then you won't see those lights. And light in these kind of areas is like a cycle of death. A lot of these insects, they find their directions by the reflection on their wings. So, I mean, that's what kind of observations you start doing, and start looking closely how I am impacting even an insect, even birds or animals or other ecosystems which are around, and how my building is a responsibility to the setting that it's coming into, and not just an element which has to be placed there. It has a lot of overbearing on the landscape that it is, even in the cities, I would say, not just in these wild areas, but even in the cities, these kind of issues. I mean, we make our buildings in areas where elephant corridors used to be, and then we have a complaint of, okay, there's an elephant coming into the village, I mean these areas, and people dying, all of that, and then we don't see it as a natural flow of animals, and we're making buildings out there. So that way, that kind of sensitization, when you start thinking about how I impact the ecosystems or the simple life forms, it brings a lot of change in material and choice of design that you do.
That is very enlightening and eye-opening, I must say. Like, even I haven't thought of like going into these details, and like how small things could, create such a big impact while designing. So now, so what are some of the myths that surround natural building materials that you come across? Like, people, have certain kind of notions when it comes to natural buildings.
Yeah. So the first notion is when you make with natural building, it has to be low cost, but it does not become low cost. When you're doing it for the first time, it will actually cost you more than normal concrete construction, because you're doing something which the craftsmen or the masons are not used to doing, and you're transferring a lot of knowledge to them. But the second time you do, the cost will come a little down. Third time you do, it will come a little more down. And that way, and you will have some skilled masons and all, which will add a lot of value. And then it will eventually come down to a point where it's almost equal. Sometimes it will be more than the normal construction only. And second is to understand that these materials are natural materials and they have a life of their own. But we have a huge palette. Like, certain materials have really, really long life, much longer than concrete. So people have a myth that the life of these buildings are very less, but it's other way. The Portland cement, which was invented, is just almost a century old, not more than that. And the technique itself is not more than that old. And when they teach us, they tell us the age of concrete building is not more than 80 to 100 years. You have to change it. You have to build again. But the buildings that we have had in our these spaces, so there are different scale of buildings. The natural dwellings are different, and the residences are different, and the forts and all are different. So when you go by the scale, there are actually bigger scale buildings which are made of these natural materials using your adobe, your stone, and these gur dal, arhar dal, and all of that mix, lime, all of that, and those have been there for hundreds and thousands of years. Like, we have in Bhopal structures made from Gond dynasty times, even now, and all of those are natural material buildings, and they have shown the test of time, basically. So that way, these buildings can be really resilient if designed right way. And there's a lot of technical inputs that are coming into these materials, which are, which has slight input of the modern technologies, but there is a lot of, and I never say that the buildings has to be completely natural. We as humans, we have learned a lot. The problem is we use excessive material which is not required in some certain places. Like some amount of cement is a good invention. Even plastic is a good invention, but the way we use it has transformed, has a lot of problems. I mean, some amount of cement can be really good with Adobe for stabilization, or CSEB for that matter, and to be used in cities, that is compressed stabilized earth blocks. And you can have a lot of less carbon footprint. So I am up for using like ecologically sensitive materials, and that's why I've started calling my practice as ecological design and not as natural building, because definitely if you cannot make I mean, buildings which are entirely natural buildings as of now, which is a little difficult. I mean, it's not impossible, a little difficult, but with some inputs of cement wherever it's necessary, like in the foundation if you require, or at some places if you require. So you can minimize a lot. You don't need it in walls. You don't need your walls to be unbreathable. So that way, you can judicially use these material wherever it's necessary, and still have a building made out of like 80%, 85% out of natural materials, and not compromising at all on the strength. So this is the second the issue that people usually have. I think these are the major two things I would mention.
All right, okay, and maybe like they fear, what happens to a mud structure during rains or an earthquake kind of thing. So maybe they have thoughts, second thoughts about that.
So, regarding the rain, so you need to definitely, even if you're making a concrete structure, you should make sure that your walls and openings are not exposed to rain. If you have like a proper drain for the water, your problem is solved. Even if your concrete house is exposed a lot to rains from the sides and all, the water finds its way somehow. And so what we do is the house should have like a good hat and a good boot. So the overhang should be enough that the walls are saved from the rain splash, and it should have a good boot, a good pair of foundations, and you're good basically. And the idea is people believe that how the way they look at their houses is like, they look at with a lot of detachment. I don't know why people don't want to touch their house. And with concrete that happens. And like a human being, a natural material based building requires a certain caressing. It requires your touch. It requires it breathes with you. It helps you stay healthy. So it requires a little maintenance. And I certainly believe that when you like जब आप लीपते हैं ना, like when you put a mud plaster on the wall or on the floor, you connect to that space a lot more, and it helps you in manifold ways. So people don't see those benefits as economical and health gain, and they just see the amount that is being expended on the construction of these buildings. So that way it has a lot different ways to give you back, and not just by giving you a shelter, but taking care of your health, the air that you breathe in, the intoxicant-free plasters that you can have, and all of that. So there's a lot more detail to what benefits natural buildings can give you, and it has definitely shown a lot of, when you're direct contact with the earth, there's a thing called earthing of human body which happens. So, and there's a flow which is documented. It's not just like a thing which people say, but it's documented. It gives you better sleep. It releases stress relieving hormones in your body, and you wake up like really fresh because of this contact. And with sort of concrete, it does not happen. You're not in contact with earth directly. There's a layer of concrete, there's a layer of plastic and all of that which separates us. So that way there's a lot that can be gained from these buildings.
A house or a home is something very personal, like the clothes maybe you get stitched for your wedding.
Definitely.
But that has been lost in cities and urban areas. Maybe somewhere it is still intact in rural areas, and people are very, very proud about building their own home with their own hands.
Yes. And there's a much bigger and important layer which I would like to talk about when you mentioned this. So as you talked about, like roti kapra makan. There's this guy called John Jandai. You should see one of his talk on TED. It's very interesting how simple, how easy.
Is easy, we make it complicated.
Right? Be complicated. So that makes it very clear with examples how you can just make your buildings and easily grow your food. But it brings me to one observations of the rural life. I was working on this one competition once, and it was about security through architecture. And I ended up feeling that it cannot, you have to say in favor of it and against it. So I ended up choosing against it, that the architecture as we see cannot bring security, because the most unsafe place for a person regarding security is a couple's bedroom. Okay, that is the most unsafe place because the most number of sort of murders have happened in these spaces. So how do you become safe in a building? Because the most unsafe place is your own. So would you put a wall in the bed? It's not possible, right? And then we have these concepts of gated communities in the cities, which sells the idea of security. That you are more safe, and then you have a caller ID. Then you ring on the bell. There's a camera which sees you and which talks about security. Like, okay, you can see the person who's outside. You don't know what he's carrying, what intention he is coming with. Once he's inside, he can do anything. So, and what these things have been doing in the West is these gated communities, and it's slowly coming to India as well. What it does, it creates a divide in the area. By creating a multi-rise, and then there is a sort of a slum, and then you see a disparity of, ideological belief, a person's own what he see, how he see, and that's where the conflict is. And then when there's that conflict, you can traverse any wall, you can cross any security gate, you can do anything, and that becomes a problem. And that's where the crime rises and the security is questioned.
I just saw that example happening with like us 2 days back. We live in a locality which is in Delhi right now, which is still, connected to maybe small gardens, but it was like it's still housing, like bungalows kind of thing. But people are selling their bungalows and moving to, say, like cities like Gurgaon, where they have these gated communities where you get like plumber and like, say, ambulance, all these things on call, like comforts, for additional comforts and additional security. And that, what you're saying is, the divide between the classes is like very much visible. To serve that whole gated community, there is a slum coming up where immigrants from, say, Bangladesh are like serving those people, and they have to live there, like also changing their names. And maybe the guards' residency, the place they have built for the staff, in the name of green architecture, they do have a facade which creepers are growing on it, but it is just like a wheel to maybe, keep the underbelly in shadow kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, so it is a very, shrewd tool that real estate owners have been coming up with, and it has led to ghost towns in the US and different areas, because then once they sell it off all of this, they still want to make more and more money. So they would create downtowns in these areas and slowly reduce the cost of real estate there, and people will start moving out and buy another place, and then they will make a downtown there. So it's a never-ending cycle. But the reason why I brought this up is in village, the security is maintained in a very different context. It's a very thin it's a very thin fabric of people monitoring each other just by the eyes, just by a sense of sort of compassion. They come and meet every other month for a festival, and they see faces. When you see faces, when you know people, the rate of crime reduces in a way that it's a monitored in a very different close-knit society where you know everyone, you know faces, you meet people, and it's a very different dynamic which cannot be defined. It cannot. There's no policing isn't such of like there's a guard or this or that, but there's this person who just goes and talks with people and know how. And that's why the depression and all of that becomes very different in scale of. There's a local monitoring, local compassion and empathy that you share with people around and all. And that's a bigger solution than providing all of that paraphernalia of these gated communities and all of that. So, slight fascination of mine.
I can, maybe we can have a entire podcast on these topics,
Honestly,
about
exactly.
The social fabric. So coming back to the community, so you've been working with rural communities, and do you think that you can, as an individual, you can create a bigger impact when you're working with smaller communities?
I think yes. I think there is a lot of opportunity out there. There are like the group that I was working with in Bhopal. We used to believe like one individual, one urban youth for a rural area or rural community can bring a lot of change with the know-how and the knowledge that they bring in. And similarly, what we were doing in Darjeeling also has similar aspects, that we just introduce them certain techniques of how bamboo can be used better. And they were really quick to pick it up because they have that hands of working with bamboo, how to split it, how to cut it, how to harvest it, all the local knowledge about it. But just certain aspect that we introduced, and they made the whole structure out of it. They made the entire joinery, furniture, all of it. So I definitely feel working with local communities, considering the fact that you're very sensitive about what kind of interventions that you're bringing in, what kind of, how do you respect the local knowledge, local tradition, and and read through it. And because we can be dissipators of wrong ideas as well. So we need to be very vigilant when we introduce certain things, and community acceptance of it is very important and should be addressed in very different ways. And indigenous knowledge or local knowledge about things should be respected in a way of patents, I believe. There should be a lot of we have patents for all the things, but not for these techniques which are there, and that's why they don't get paid enough or much. So I feel that's a divide we still see in a lot of ways when we work with communities, and that needs to be respected, that needs to be addressed, and there has to be local consensus for these things. I was just introduced by one of the persons that there are actually bylaws about what kind of seeds you can take from a place and what kind of seeds you can introduce at a place. So you can't, by a biodiversity law, you can't take a specific thing from one place to another, and you have to have a process through it. A local aam sabha jo hota hai, like gram panchayat and all, resolution from there. But it's not applicable everywhere. It has been applied in certain states. Some places in Tamil Nadu, it has been applied. So those kind of ideologies are really, I'm pro for them, because it supports the indigenous knowledge. A lot of people, what they do is when they try to move to certain like these kind of farms and forest and start to live with communities, they try to take advantage of in a wrong way and not give back to the community as much as they could, and as much they should. So that kind of value system has to be there when you work with a local community, and that would, I would say, like with working with community, one has to be like really sensitive and
I think you
respectful and
rightly put it out. Like you have to be sensitive with the kind of interventions you are trying to do, even if you're coming from the thought process that you want to do something good, but still, if you do not study and respect their own culture, you might end up disrupting many social systems that are already in place, or say ecosystems already in place. Reminds me of the movie documentary which is called Schooling the World. I'm not sure if you have seen it.
Okay.
So it is also about, that is when I actually realized, like how wrong I had been thinking of trying to maybe, teach in rural areas. So it is about Ladakh, and how like even people wanted to teach them English and opening up schools there, and still, you somehow, like even if you're trying to do something good and educate them, you maybe there is a chance that you end up taking their existing culture. Also, similar example I could see while I visited a village which is at the border of Nagaland and Myanmar. It's called Longwa. They used to be headhunters before, like the tribals there. I mean, that is another topic, that whether it should have continued or not. But while the British missionaries, they came in the name of doing good, like by bringing education and stuff, they took away all the culture that was prevalent there, dressing style there. So many habits, go away. And as designers, we also, sometimes try to venture in rural area that we want to do something good, but then one has to be, like you rightly said, really sensitive about like even your minor intervention can create such a big impact within the community.
Even like, I mean, when you approach them, so even what you're wearing becomes aspirational for them. How you go there, how much you use your phone, how much you use a headphone or your laptop, it becomes an aspirational thing for them, which I don't know. It's very blurry for me also, but I have seen its wrong impact. So I'm very like sensitive about this, like using it in front of them, or how do you interact? I mean, a lot of people will object with this because you need to introduce them to these devices so that they can take the community, lead the community with it as well, which is a blurry line for me, how much it should be, how much it should not. But definitely there can be a wrong impact. And I would, as you mentioned about schooling, we came to this one liner, which defines it like really nicely. So there is a very big difference in education and literacy. Saksharta or Siksha mein bahut antar hai. So literacy is like just having it on paper. Education can be about anything: growing your food, how to use a sickle, how to take a
life
cow,
skills, basically.
So hum log, like we from the urbans, we believe like we have like a literacy, we have a degree, we have this much amount, but we might not have the education that they have. So
we don't know how to grow food. We cannot like make our own structures. We cannot make our own clothes. Maybe, I mean, all the basic things, like maybe lockdown, showed so many people that like, what if tomorrow, say even the grocery shops were closed down, like what will we do? So we have to be like very self-resilient and self-sufficient when it at least comes to like basics, food and shelter. Like you have to have your own supply for these things. And rural communities still are connected to all this. Like at least they have their own farms where they're growing food and sharing things, like having a sharing economy, which is also not the case in cities anymore.
We go with a lens that we know a lot, and that's where the problem starts, basically.
Hmm.
And we should go with a lens that, I mean, like probably to learn from them. And that way we will be able to probably do something for ourselves, and then in a way that it's a coexistence that happens. But if you go with a lens that I know too much and I can help them, then it's a problem where you might do an intervention which is not required. And
Yeah, I mean, it's a very thin line, and I think we all are still figuring it out, like our role in the
definitely
whole
same
system, that how we can bring a positive change, but being really sensitive about what is already there as the system which has been coming, like passed on from generations. So great. Now you might have worked with so many natural materials, right? So like, it's just a curious question, like, is there a favorite material that you like to work with, or how do you approach design projects at various locations?
So definitely I have one material which I am as of now like skilled with more. So bamboo is the thing for me, but I completely respect its contextuality. So I've been denying to use it in certain projects because it does not grow there, and it does not is easily available there. So that way, and I'm trying to learn more about earth. And recently I was in Oroville. I was trying to learn about what people are doing with CACB, compressed stabilized earth block, which is not completely natural. It has some kind of stabilization involved. So that is one thing which I am exploring. But definitely bamboo is one material which I am a fan of because it grows in different forms everywhere in India, in tropical belt in all over the world. And it is up to your creative abilities how you can use it. And that way it's a fast growing grass and it gets replenished a lot sooner. So that way it is really resilient, regenerative, and a good material to design with, provided you have enough know-how about how it's harvested, how it can be treated, how it can be used in different spaces. Like in Madhya Pradesh, we have a very different challenge of having a lot of bamboo, which goes actually waste. 75% of MP's bamboo gets wasted or gets used in the pulp industry because it has like thorns into it. So it's very difficult to use it for design as of now. And but I would not suggest to use bamboo blankly without considering the context. Like I've been denying to use it at places where it's really harsh sun and less of atmosphere where it naturally grows and thrives in, because that way it is more resilient. Like if you use it in Northeast where it is growing, the moisture level, the humidity, it's of a balance that even if it's cut, it can be more long lasting. So if I bring it down to Madhya Pradesh in a space where it is like really harsh, then it might not last that long. So yeah, definitely bamboo is my material of choice.
Got it. So, and like, you've been building a lot with your own hands. So do you believe that there is a different kind of joy when you create something with your own hands, may it be a whole building or a product? And can you draw any parallels to something that people are not doing any physical work anymore that brings them that, authentic happiness?
Yeah, that's a very important point that you have gotten. And so looking into it that way, yes, definitely when your physical being is connected with your mental being, like what you're doing, you're sort of creating something with your hands. It definitely is much, much more rewarding than any kind of achievement that you do, even if it's a small thing. And as an architect, it really helps to know the material really well. Considering if you're using cob, you're using mud or your bamboo, then when you're molding it, you're holding it, trying to break the ball that you've made out of cob, or you're trying to split the bamboo. All of these small gestures of your hand, how do you use the knife, how do you tamp the, all of these small things has a lot of physical memory, muscle memory to it, and it helps you to remember what are the structural aspects of it and design that way. So as architects, it's definitely really much more helpful and rewarding. And the part where you talked about like how it can help you be also happy. So there's a lot that you can gain when you do this meditative exercise of just plastering. And people have not been working with their hands as much and not finding enough time to do these things. So all of these activities like weaving of bamboo mat, or creating a crochet, or has a lot of meditation involved. You don't have to just go and sit and do meditation and put your concentration on the infinite, or but all of these are meditative exercises in a lot of ways. And I am very sort of I don't know how to define this, but I don't think the time wasted is time wasted, or when you work on certain things, it does. These things really help you meditate in a different way and has a lot of reward to give you. So I would really suggest that people should try and find the material of their choice and use it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of photos came up during the Tokyo Olympics also, where like male athletes were doing crochet. So not only natural building, maybe some kind of activity of like, or an act of creation with some kind of material. I feel, as you mentioned, that it is a meditative process and could also be therapeutic, you know, and give us a sense of accomplishment, even if it is a very small product that you created yourself with your own hands. Maybe that could help fill the void that people have been feeling like right now in the cities, I feel.
And it's actually valuing your time much more. Like John Jandai rightly says in his talk, that people used to do those things when they were having ample amount of time, because their things are growing, they have enough time. And I would say one has to make that time, and that's when you really connect to yourself and rejoice, have a slow breathing rate, and have sort of something which is rewarding in different ways, be it mentally, be it physically, and the joy of creation is the best.
True. So, like, what are the additional perks of building in a community? Can you tell us more about the relationships and bonds that you form during the building process? You know, when people come together and build, how's a site, a natural building site like, and what are the relationships that you have formed over time during your builds?
So when you do a building by yourself, and you definitely connect to the space that you're making first, you won't consider it will be sort of like a spiritual place for you to be, because there's been so much time and energy and your own effort that has been put in, and it will be sort of elevating in different ways. And then you're working with a community and you see those faces all together and you're trying to devise solutions by yourself. Then there's a lot of brainstorming that happens. And I would say I've learned a lot from the community. Sanuda was one of the craftsmen we had. His resilience, his way of doing things and taking it head on was something which was, which has taught me a lot. And in that way, different people who come in picture during this making of these buildings teach you a lot of things, because you're present, you're not detached from this whole process. And that's a precursor that you have to be there. And that's why when I'm not very experienced architect or so, but whenever I design, even now, I try to be on the site as much as possible, and spend as much time there. And there's a thing called protracted vision or protracted observation of the place. So you try to understand how people are making these spaces, and what energies are involved, and how much the DDs will be taking docos in hills. You must have seen in Uttarakhand as well. Like, they put their doco, a lot of stones at the back, and they will carry down, and they'll come back. They'll do this like 20 times in a day, and you can't do even once or twice. So you develop a respect for labor a lot of ways. And otherwise, you are too detached. You don't know who has worked on your building. And so this is a little out of context, but once we finish the air dwellings.
Very good point that you brought up, like the disconnect between the conventional architecture has put architects on a pedestal, whereas there is no connect with the hard work and labor that has gone onto the building, and the whole credit goes to the architect for the design and all those awards that we give. But there is a lot of disconnect between like who's creating the building actually and who designed it, and there is no interaction process. Also, when mainstream architects go to the site, also the laborers are looked down upon, and there is also this topic of discussing if somebody wants to be a natural builder, there is this comment that often comes: you either be an architect or you want to be a laborer, kind of thing, which is such a bad comment to say.
It's a bad way to look at it, basically. So and I remember we used to, when we were working, all Didis, Dajus, and so what we used to do is we used to at times have lunch together. So it was such a happy and rewarding feeling when everyone is bringing different things from their house, and we're just sitting out there, all the workers, and just talking about the day, like what happened, this guy drank during the work hour, and whatever, just like normal chat. And then the person connects to you in a very different way. It's a bond that you've created, and that energy flows into the building that you've made. So that way, it's really community driven. You respect the labor, and you enable them in a way that they can make those buildings by themselves. You don't have to be present. So that knowledge transfer has been done, and they can do it by themselves. So that's the whole idea, that they should be able to do it. So
so it is a much more inclusive process.
And it should
also
be
democratic in certain way. Like anybody can do it. Say mostly natural materials generally are not as violent as the building sites that we have in conventional architecture when you're building with concrete. So on natural building sites, even say a small child could volunteer and use that so much energy that has a child. And also maybe somebody who is say 80-year-old lady in a village, she still has that vigor and strength, maybe much more than us, to work with the natural materials, if given that kind of direction and shown okay, this is the material. Even though mostly they are acquainted with those materials, but maybe they've lost touch, or maybe even they have been say brainwashed in a way by showing that what is development, and you have a still, and you need to move to a say RCC slab house. Otherwise, there are things happening in villages in say Uttarakhand also, where they do not offer your son or daughter into that particular house if it is still a natural built, say, stone structure or mud house, because of the status that has been attached to a cement house now.
Okay.
So maybe that notion
That's a,
has to be changed, and maybe the, like, respect for a natural built building has to be, the image has to be improved, basically, like
yeah.
reinstated.
And about the community of people working with it, I would say that it is very important to enable these people to be able to take pride in their work so that they practice it, because
Yeah,
otherwise they're not
exactly.
taking it ahead. And that's where what you're saying gets addressed. Like, how do you uh, bring down this notion which has been created with the natural building that is wrong, or is like kacha makan or not good? And that's where you have craftsmen or people who believe in you or who believe in the technique and want to do it. And that's where the main idea of dissipation comes in, that the community that you're working with or the craftsmen can do it. And I will share one example. I recently went to Anahad. It is in Hyderabad. It's a very interesting community who's working with natural buildings and CACB. They have a lot of experiments. So what beautifully they have done is they have given equal shares to the workers who are working with them, with the community. So they share the profits and the design cost and everything equally with the people who are working in there as craftsmen, as masons, as workers, and these are different people from different places. So that kind of fair share model one has to come in, where you respect that artisan work and not just keep yourself, as you rightly said, like on pedestal of design, because you're nothing without masons, without people who can execute it. So there has to be a fair share model of where you respect them, and that will strengthen them in a very different way. They will strengthen them in a way that they will take their own projects, they will take the ideas ahead much differently and dissipate it far off. And that is essential. I mean, we don't see the respect for labor, respect for work, and there's a divide. I mean, how does a person, I mean, it will be contradictory to the profession, but how does my work becomes more payable than the person who is working and sweating out in the sun? Is a question that needs to be asked, right? And once we start addressing that, because I mean, I also have to earn a bread, he also earn a bread, and you start, when you ask that question, how do I earn 10 times more than him, or where can the equal part can be come in? That's when you talk about utopia and of something which you want to proceed to, but it needs to be talked about. And then it has to be like a
I've
fair.
also been thinking about, this whole hierarchy model, like if there has been a way to somehow like break this hierarchy, but again, like it becomes too utopian when you try and practice that. But it should be talked upon, and maybe more models like fair share models, or maybe say decentralized models, and a way of distributed capitalism needs to be thought upon, that everybody gets a fair share. It's a more inclusive process. As maybe as studios, you have to like really think about the principles of how you go about it.
Definitely. And the idea is like, when you enable them, then the main idea that these kind of buildings should be built gets manifested. Otherwise, it's very difficult for these ideas to be long lasting and impactful for a wider range of people, wider communities and cities. We need more people to be able to do it.
So, like, most of the projects now are happening in, say, rural areas or suburbs. So are you optimistic about a situation where people in cities, start taking up natural buildings techniques for their residences?
So it is a very gray area as of now, like if it can be implemented in the cities or how it can be implemented in cities. But there are certain solutions which people are coming up with, that you don't need walls to be made out of brick, because your frame structure you're making, you can have always bamboo and wattle and daub being used there. And there are really interesting architects who have been working with mud that comes out from the same land and use those to make the bricks, so your carbon footprint reduces. So I certainly have a lot of hopes in cities, because and I'm really optimistic about it, because cities are really what to say, it's are the best solutions. But the problem is we're doing them wrong. We're doing the cities wrong. It is such high density of people together, such high, we're not taking up too much land out there. But that's where our challenges also comes in, that we need more resources per square meter of area. And that way cities can be done much better. And we need to address the natural cycles into the place and be able to do it. So it's not just about natural building that I would say, but I would say at a city level, we need to be able to assess problems and find solutions. We have to be looking forward to it. Otherwise, we have the news coming just a few days ago, like the groundwater in Chennai has dried out completely. And we often give this example in the tour also in TIEEDI, that you see these drastic patterns of a flood and drought happening in the same city like Chennai in the same year. And why is that? It's because of a huge problem that we don't address. Like we have been creating all the imporous or non-porous material materials, so the water is not seeping down, so that's why you have a flood when it rains. And because it's not seeping down, it's just washing off, you have a drought because the aquifers are not recharging. So we're doing a lot of these kind of problems. We're seeing a lot of these kind of problems. So when we try a natural cycle, how we can revive the water in the aquifers, we probably can do cities much better and come up with these materials and solutions which can involve more materials which have least carbon footprint or least embodied and can be a part of our building spaces.
Interesting. So, like, apart from the current project that you are doing and the project that you have done, do you have like a dream project in mind that you would want to do?
So yeah, as of now, I'm like working on a project in Madhya Pradesh. So I'm visiting my hometown and I'm back in my own house in Bhopal. And that's where I get like good internet. Otherwise, usually in the forest, we don't have much of an internet. So we could not have done a podcast from Bandhavgarh, I suppose. I would want to make my own house in the wild. That's I've been living into a shack from last 3 years, and I want to make a shack of my own. So that will be the simple, small dream project. I don't want to have too big of an impact on the land. And
so, do you get time to read books? And what books, like, do you say, like, would have influenced your whole career path that you have taken right now?
The Little Prince, but it's a very creative, very small read, which I could actually complete. And for me, it was really a good, inspiring point for me, a childish imagination that could drive you. So that's what I always want to keep with myself, a childish imagination of the possibilities that are there and how empathetic you can be with what you do and people you meet is something I would take from that book, and I would advise everyone to read it. It's a small read. I am not a big reader.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, what would be your message or advice to, say, young students who are still studying architecture right now?
Yeah. So it's a very tough because I was not a very good student so I would say, like, don't worry if you are not very great at a lot of things, but be open to explorations, be open to observing, be open to just seeing things differently, because we need a lot more people who thinks and sees things differently than people who are good at things. A lot of people are good at things which a lot of people are good at. So just start seeing and questioning everything, and you should always have a why with yourself, like why this. Just ask why questions, like why this material, why this design, why. So it will lead you to a lot of journeys, a lot of questions which will be answered, some will not be answered, but it's important to question the norm, and everyone will find their own different paths and ways to it. So yeah, I mean, I won't say that start studying about natural building or anything, nothing like that. Just ask questions. These are so basic solutions to things that it's so intuitive that way. So when you ask it, the easier question will always be intuitive answer, having an intuitive answer. So yeah, start asking questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Saurabh. Like, it has been an eye-opening interview for me. Like, I got to learn so many things, and like there's so many topics that we touched upon that, I still feel that maybe when we meet in person or like have a future call, we should discuss in depth, because these things need discussions, and these things needed to be like dissipated and like spread awareness upon. So thank you for your time. And lastly, just something like, what if somebody wants to say contact you or carry forward this conversation? Maybe if you could share your say Instagram handle, although I will mention it in the description, or some other means to reach you.
Yeah, definitely. You can contact me at Permaculture Architect on Instagram. So there I keep writing a little about my observations and the experiences in the wild. And I keep sharing some tips about like how we have done certain building elements. So that's where you can find me. And yeah, you can write me there. I mean, I'm very accessible. All the contacts you'll find out there.
Perfect.
So yeah, Permaculture Architect.